The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, this is Eric Erlandson with Unanet. I'll be doing the webinar today. I'm going to give, it's 9:59 now. I'll wait just another minute here before we get started to make sure that everyone who desires to is in attendance. So please stand by for just a moment and we'll get going. Okay, it is 10 o'clock. Happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome back from what I hope was a lovely Labor Day weekend for you. Today, it's going to be my pleasure to talk to you a bit about the Unanet platform in the areas of DCAA compliant time and expense reporting and automation and dipping into project accounting and the ways that Unanet will help rather profusely actually in managing not just direct but indirect costs and help you enforce all the rules and processes necessary in a DCAA monitored or audited environment. I am a former Unanet customer myself prior to coming to work at the company, so I can vouch for the effectiveness within the realm of government contracting of this system. But just a couple quick housekeeping items before I get started here, because through the wonders of GoToMeeting webinar functionality, we're obviously able to meet with you all remotely like this. And 99 times, or maybe 98 times out of 100, all goes perfectly smoothly. But then that once or twice when it doesn't, ordinarily it tends to be a problem on the client side. If there's you're having any kind of issue, maybe you lose my video, or you lose my audio. Please just exit the session by closing that little GoToMeeting box, and then re-enter it. Okay, by going back to the email, the link in the email invite you got, and just pop back into the session. Chances are that everything will be just fine from there. If it's something on my end, I will be doing the same, but chances are it's usually just an issue on the client end, so do that and you'll be all set. Now, you also have the ability in that GoToMeeting screen to enter questions in the question section. Please feel free to do so. I've got a lot to cover. I will do my best to try at the end to answer a question or two, but at the very least, we save all those questions and we respond to you by email or phone following the presentation. So please don't hesitate to weigh in there. Okay. But as I said, please do excuse me if I'm not able to get to your questions during the course of the presentation. I'll do my best. Okay. Very quickly, starting off at the highest level here, if you are not already familiar with the Unanet platform, just to orient you to what the Unanet platform can be to different customers, or what it is to different customers of ours. Over 1,200 organizations out there domestically and internationally using the platform today. Vast majority of them are government contractors for doing at least some portion of their work for the U.S. federal government. But within that realm, the platform can be almost anything you want to be a complete ERP platform, encompassing all of the functionality that you see here in these various verticals, from accounting and invoicing to the ability to map out your organization's expected activities at the opportunity level or the project level for a contract that has already been signed. And then as those opportunities become real, the execution of those projects can be assisted in the Unanet environment through the gathering of actuals. Obviously, we're going to talk quite a bit about timesheets and expense reporting and the administration of that actuals data, but also through many other capabilities to, in real time, reflect what is happening in your organization, literally as time is being entered in timesheets. For instance, project managers having real-time reports, real-time graphical dashboarding, showing them what is happening with their projects as it happens, as an hour is being entered in a timesheet, all the raw costs, all the burdens that are being added to that cost, and then totaled up along with the revenue, whether it's on a fixed price schedule, maybe it's a time and materials contract, or a cost plus fixed fee, or other cost plus based contract. The system will show you in real time exactly what is happening, and I'll show you a little bit about how that works. But pretty critical for managing, for a total cost accounting environment where we need to be able to see what is happening, not just with our directs, but our indirects as they happen, preferably as they happen, as opposed to the typical scenario where we might be able to see those things, those totals, how things are accumulating once the books have been closed for the month, maybe a week or two into the following month, and then finally get to see, oh my goodness, look what happened. In Unanet, you can see it as it happens. If something is deviating from plan, you can deal with it immediately before it has the ability to gather too much momentum, if you will. The Unanet environment is a cloud-based environment, of course. We provide it as a cloud-based service. The thing I always like to mention, though, about the nature of Unanet's cloud-based services, this is a platform that is entirely server-side. What I mean by that is all processing happens at the server end. On the client end, all you need is a browser. Basically any browser, Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge, Safari, Firefox, Chrome, you name it, on any device, Windows, Android, iOS. You just open up a browser and you go. There's nothing to be installed or supported on the client end, and that just makes the deployment and support of your end users as simple as it could possibly be. Quick word about our customer base. As you see here, over 1,200. Actually, I think we're getting close to 1,300 companies. We've got more and more hopping on every day. But the commonality that you'll find within the Unanet universe here is project-oriented organizations where labor is the primary driver. I should say labor and the other direct and indirect costs associated with that labor are the primary drivers of the cost equation. But within that realm, you will find every type of organization. I mean, the vast majority are certainly technical services of some type, but you will find, large government contractors, some of which you may recognize the name of here, small, medium size. You'll find commercial technical services firms. You'll find nonprofits. You'll find universities. I mean, just about everything you can imagine. Okay, that in terms of project-oriented organizations. This is a platform that's been around for over 20 years now, so we've got a pretty good track record. Our customer retention is tops for the industry. But one thing that, particularly for government contractors, that may be of interest is that this platform is 100% developed and supported here in the U.S. Okay, just with all the things going on in the world today and concerns with technology either being developed and or being accessible or influenceable from foreign sources, Unanet, 100% of our development happens at our headquarters in Dulles, Virginia. And while we have presence all over the U.S., every resource you would ever deal with would be a U.S.-based resource. Okay. A couple other things to make note of before we get into the DCAA specific stuff is just some of the experiences that Unanet customers have enjoyed. One of the most noticeable ones being the ability, once they have Unanet in-house, to be able to spend far less time on housekeeping tasks, if you will, and more time on actually analyzing and running the business and creating more revenue and serving customers than administrative tasks that in their current systems are taking them, an extraordinary amount of manual labor. Here we just see, one example of that, dollars of revenue processed by accounting departments following the advent of Unanet from other systems. I mean, I won't mention names, but the typical competitors in the government contractor space. Likewise, anyone who's familiar with the Net Promoter Score out there in the consulting industry may recognize this and may recognize the incredible disparity between what our customers experience and then report to external sources, not to us, but to external sources gathering this data versus some of those legacy competitors you may be familiar with. Now, to jump into what we're really here today to talk about, that is operating within the DCAA monitored and audited environment. That is, you've got contracts that are call out the Federal Acquisition Regulation requirements. Some of the most notable things that a system can assist with in creating both a process and then enforcing that process in a system that will be acceptable and ideally approved by DCAA auditors should they come to town, are things like let's talk about time, for instance, and some of the controls, time administration, some of the controls necessary there. Obviously, in that environment, we're not allowed to record time in advance. I can't, it's Tuesday. I can't go to Thursday on my timesheet and start entering data that I expect I will spend on a government contract. Now that may be okay on an indirect project. Okay, maybe okay if I also do commercial work. It may be okay on a commercial project, but in the case of Unanet, we can ensure that your folks are not doing so on direct government contracts. Obviously, when changes are made in this environment to data that's already been committed to a timesheet, there needs to be a record of who, what, when, why. A system like Unanet can do that for you automatically. You're going to see examples of that. Full ability to delineate any other detail needed, whether it's regarding time entry or expenses being reported against a project, direct or indirect. The ability to at least help with controlling your staff's required daily time entry. In Unanet, we'll talk about how we can help with that, and the ability to track timesheet statuses. Validation controls to ensure that charges are accurate and they're going to the right place, and so on and so forth. Some of the other things that, of course, are required in the Unanet, in the DCAA environment, are ensuring that users are only able to access their own data unless specifically given authorization to do so, that, as documented in a process and given by and granted by an administrator. Workforce authorization, ability not just limit folks to the work, the projects, the tasks that they are supposed to be working on, but also to inform them of those workforce authorizations, let them know what they have been assigned to and are supposed to be working on. These are all capabilities that would be very nice for DCAA in a DCAA audited environment, and these are things that we can provide, and so on and so forth, as you see here. Workflow, again, everything from audit trails to automated approval workflows, set in advance, but giving you the flexibility to construct as many specific workflows and apply them to different members or parts of your organization as needed. All up and down, not just the entry of time and expenses, but the actual review, approval, ultimately, the billing and payroll processing of that data. Okay. Some of the other things that are pretty important in an environment where we might deal with not just salaried but hourly workers, where we might deal with all manner of contract vehicles, fixed price, time and material, cost plus and variations, even hybrids, where we have a T&M contract that spits a fixed price task order at us. We'll talk a little bit about how Unanet helps with all of those needs, which come up routinely within our customer base. And then when it comes to actually monitoring what's going on, because as I mentioned before, Unanet gives the ability not just to plan out your operations, but then monitor them in real time. We'll take a little look at how we'll only have time to look at a few ways. The complete selection of methods you will have to monitor status, performance, what's going on in your organization are innumerable, but I'll show you a couple examples of that. In addition, we also give you the ability to collaborate within the Unanet environment, and that can be anything from uploading documents pertaining to a project, a government contract project, to assigning people to do work on those documents or do other type of work on the project and give them due dates and track their progress and allow them to provide you feedback on what you've tasked them with and so on. And then, of course, hypercritical in this environment is the ability to ensure, in that total cost accounting environment, to ensure a complete and accurate allocation of costs to the direct or indirect accounts, again, as applicable. Okay. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the definition of a direct cost versus an indirect cost, but of course, direct costs might fall in the area of labor, various ODCs, whether those ODCs are anything from travel or material to subcontractors working that we have let out contracts to perform some of the work on those projects, or an indirect cost that is things that should be allocated that it might be associated with fringe benefits, might be associated with facilities costs, general administrative costs, and so on. Again, all things that Unanet will help you not just manage, but ensure and be able to show an auditor when they come to town that they are being properly allocated, are being properly controlled, and that you can account for every cent. Now, to get into the system itself, very quickly, kind of an orientation to the Unanet environment. This is pretty fundamental to all the things we're going to take a look at here. We have created Unanet with what we refer to as a dashboard-oriented environment. Now, I'm logged in right now as someone who has complete access as an administrator to all functionality within the Unanet platform, and as a result, access to all individual dashboards that are available within our project portfolio financials version, the most complete version of our platform. What that means is that any one of these dashboards this individual can go to, first of all, they can configure them. This individual, when they've configured their home dashboard, has certain types of data and tools that they have set on this particular dashboard, because this is what they want at their fingertips when they first log into the system. Fine, they can see some resource allocation, some planned resource allocation out into the future on their personnel, or the P&L for their company or department or division, and so on and so forth. And every one of these dashboards can be configured in a very simple point-and-click manner. Even the charts and reports themselves are created in a simple point-and-click manner, so that your personnel, literally my project managers at my last company, within a month, they were developing all of this graphical and tabular content themselves. Okay, they didn't need someone to do it for them. But if they wanted to come in here to do some project management, they might just go to the project dashboard, because they'd have a different set of data and tools that are they've already arranged for addressing that particular function. Or they come in here to do some planning and forecasting, burn rates, being able to see how their current headcount is doing against the plans that have been set to this point, whether there are gaps there, which it looks like here we need to do some hiring. And so on. So whatever you've come in to do, you can create an environment that you can automatically go to and have it all laid out to best suit your needs in that particular instance. Now, to talk about time and expense administration, what have you, find that the best way to typically jump into that is to look at it from the aspect of a typical end user. And a typical end user might, that might be all they are responsible for, is entering their actuals, putting their time in a timesheet, reporting any expenses they may have incurred, direct or indirect, in an expense report. By the way, just to let you know, we also have the concept in Unanet of expense requests. For instance, at my last organization where we used the platform, we were required to submit and get approved an expense request prior to any travel or buying of materials. Any other types of expenses we were allowed to just report after, and claim after the fact. All right, but please notice here, for a typical end user, pretty simplistic type of environment. We don't have a lot of, not cluttered here with lots of charts and stuff. This individual has their timesheets, any that are currently in use or being processed in the approval process. They have any leave requests that they've submitted that are still waiting for approval, expense reports that are in the pipeline. By the way, over here they can see any timesheets or any expense reports that they've ever submitted and completed. They can see, all that history. But right now, all that's going to be shown to them on their dashboard is those things that are quote unquote live. And if they go into a timesheet, you'll see what is basically a pretty straightforward environment to work within. Now I'm showing you a weekly timesheet right now. Extremely common format used, especially where we have companies with hourly employees. But a timesheet can be weekly, it can be bi-weekly, semi-monthly, monthly. It could be a stub period. It could start and end on whatever days you wish, and it can be different for different people in your organization if needed. Okay, and pretty simple. You effectively select a project. All right, the user I'm logged in right now. Here's all the projects that they have access to. Now we may get to the project side of Unanet in a little bit here, and you'll see that there's far more projects in Unanet in my demo system than this that I have created. But I have chosen to give this user access only to those projects and those tasks or subtasks on these projects. You'll see, for instance, here on this project they've only been given access to one task, just to ensure that they aren't, let's say, entering time where it should not be entered, where they don't belong. And by the way, when I use that assignment functionality in Unanet to create these access rules, if you will, for this individual user, the user was also being notified via email, and they can also pull up a workforce authorization on their dashboard. Obviously, another nice thing to have in the DCAA environment, proof that your folks know what they are allowed to work on and to what level. You can give them budgets, you can give them dates, and so on and so forth. But once I have selected a project and a task, I can just enter some time. Now, as it happens, though, of course, if this is a direct government project, and I try to enter some time here, I'm sorry, wait a minute, this is August 27th. This is a timesheet for last week. Let me create a timesheet very quickly for this week, so that we can see some of these controls in action. There we go. So let's say I'm on a government project and I try to enter some time for Wednesday. No, not going to happen. Now, indirects might be fine. If I think this is a commercial project in my system, let's see. So it is. Entering time in advance, not an issue. But on a government project, government contract, not going to happen. So I can enter some time. Now notice that it's being rounded to tenths. Again, something that's going to be determined to your need or set to your needs, whether you want this particular user entering time in hundredths, tenths, quarters, half, whole hours, what have you. Again, it can be different for different people. But they could also enter time by double-clicking on any cell and using a time in, time out function, saying, hey, I'm going to start working on this project. They can go away. They can even close this, come back, or just leave it, in the background, put it on another screen. And then when they come back, click the stop. Now, I don't think even 1 minute has passed. It's not going to let me record zero time. But let's say it was 11:30. I came here and hit the stop. It's going to record it for me, and so on and so forth. Additionally, every one of these time cells that we have here can have a comment entered against it. All right. If so, in fact, having entered some time in a few cells here, if I go to hit save, you're going to see that the system is barking at me a bit here because I'm actually required on this ERP upgrade project to enter a comment on every time that I enter time in a cell. This is a design task. Let's just say design review with customer. All right, and now when I save, obviously the error's gone away, get a little triangle there letting me know there's a comment, but these comments are not just fully reportable. They could be included, for instance, on a detailed version of an invoice. So if you have a customer that needs detail on all the work being done on their project, no problem. You can require comments on that particular project, and then you could also have them published, printed on a detailed version of the bill, also be delivered to the customer, whether you print it, mail it, or set the system up to automatically email it to the customer upon finalization of that invoice. Some of the other things to notice here, of course, is that in the DCAA environment is we're tracking not just direct costs but indirect costs. Maybe this is overhead or G&A. I've got some holiday, PTO, and other types of indirect costs. We track everything. All right. This is a total cost accounting environment as required under the federal acquisition regulations. But then we try to provide many other things to help you in that environment. For instance, proactive notifications. So if we get to the end of the day, I used an example of my last organization. End of the workday, we had the system look and see who still hadn't finished filling out their time card for the day. Anyone who hadn't would get a very friendly email sent to them, something along the lines of, "Hey, Charlie, so you haven't filled out your time card for the day. Please do so as soon as you can." And right in that email will be a link straight to the time card, so that whether they're on their laptop or they're on their smartphone, they can click the link on their laptop. They would go to a desktop version of the timesheet like this. On a laptop, on a smartphone, they might go directly to a mobile optimized version of the timesheet that looks something like this. Okay, just far easier to use on a small form factor device, responsive web design, auto sizes to the size and format of that device, whether it's a phone or tablet. Again, just completely browser based, so no app required, nothing to maintain on the client side. Now at my last company, we had the system check again before the workday the next morning, and if they still had not filled out their time card, they would get a little more strongly worded message about the necessity of completing their time card. But we would also have the system automatically generate a list of delinquent users to their immediate manager. So now we had a double layer of checking and enforcement, because now their manager could see that who had not filled it out and could either tap them on the shoulder, give them a call, or whatever they wanted to do. We went in the PowerPoint slides, we talked about a number of needs, one being the ability to keep track of everything that has happened to committed data. Let's say I came back later and did a little more work on this project. Let's say I did another hour, and I come back and change previously committed data. And now when I go to hit save, the system is automatically providing you have turned on this function, you want this function working this way. The system's automatically going to record original data, new data, who made the change, when they made it, and why. You can give them a list of reasons, or the typical reason for mistakes on my time cards. And then again, all of that is automatically, that audit trail is kept for you. And in the case of, let's say, a floor check, DCAA floor check, it's completely reportable. Okay, we have, as you can see here, it's recording that audit trail, and there are already ready-made reports to say, hey, show me all of these things. Charlie's time cards, maybe it's for the last month. All of the comments, the approval history that those time cards went through, the audit trails, anything that was changed in the course, and all the details therein. Okay. Let's see, other time card features, proactive notifications. I'm sorry, at the end of the time card cycle, all right, weekly, semi-monthly, monthly, the system can be set up to automatically announce to everyone, hey, it's time to go ahead and submit. As those submissions are being made, the system can automatically notify the reviewer, hey, Charlie's time card just submitted, it's waiting your attention. If you were to disapprove Charlie's time card, the system will notify Charlie of that, along with the reason for the disapproval, and so on and so forth. So the system can be set up to be completely proactive in helping you manage. So, maybe in the worst case, you're dealing with one or two stragglers. Maybe everything flows completely smoothly. But worst case, most people are paying attention to all the ways the system is helping them, notifying them, advising them. And there's some other tools to help with the process. I'll show you here momentarily as we go in. Say as more of someone who's in the management review and approval process. So time cards, pretty straightforward stuff. I mean, it takes 5 to 10 minutes to train someone to use that time card functionality, as I experienced at my last company where we were a Unanet customer. Expense reporting, similarly, very easy. And by the way, you can report expenses against multiple projects on a single expense report. I'm going to modify this one just to show you what I mean by that. I'll put a couple other projects here, both direct and indirect. And when I do that, I can lay out an allocation. I'll explain the reason for doing so momentarily. So having modified the projects I'm reporting against on this expense report, I get a little column here called charge to project. What this allows me to do, as I said, I can not just charge projects against multiple projects on the same expense report, but I can allocate individual charges across multiple projects. The scenario here perhaps being that this individual traveled to some location. Oh, it looks like Cincinnati, Ohio is where they went. And let's pretend that they spent time at both customer 2 and customer 1 working on these respective projects. 60% of their time having been spent over customer 2 and 40% at customer 1. So in this charge project column, depending on what had previously been agreed on, they could charge the entire airfare to this customer 2 project. They could charge it all to the customer 1 project, or they can have the system automatically split it up, allocate it by these percentages for them to the accounts for these billable accounts for these respective projects or customers. Right? Or in the case of maybe the subcontractor expense, maybe this was this individual paying for some subcontractor who came to do some training internally, so we're allocating that to the internal training account. Now, expense types are all going to be set up to your terminology and specifications. We're going to call them whatever you want to call them. They can be you can set many variables as to how they will work or not work. They can be controlled at the project and person level. You can decide whether this individual maybe was never allowed to use entertainment expense, what have you. But then we also have the concept of wizards that you can attach to these expense types, allowing you to collect all the data that you may desire in order to properly, track everything that not just you want internally, but perhaps the customer wants to know in terms of the expenses they are paying for, and when it comes to reimbursable expenses or billable expenses. So an airfare wizard, is allowing me to gather, the where, the whens, the airline, and so on and so forth. A type of functionality of great interest to government contractors is the fact that we have a per diem engine built right into the platform here. So I could use wizards that hit that per diem functionality, hit that per diem table, by allowing me, in this case, lodging, having traveled somewhere. Now I think it was in Australia we went to. I believe it was Ohio, was it not? So if we go to Ohio here and we pull up all the locations for Ohio, fine. I can now say, okay, well, show me, and we've got the U.S. government OCONUS per diem rate schedule is obviously pretty extensive, but if I go ahead and pull up Cincinnati, I get the current rate for Cincinnati, $142 a month. Now, for some reason, this individual had to pay a little more. It was the only hotel they could find, apparently, and in fact, when they exceeded the allowable rate, the system is going to require them to enter a reason why. All right, but having done so, notice what the system is also doing for you on an automated basis. It's splitting out the allowable and hence billable portion of the room rate and taxes for that lodging versus the unallowable portion, not just showing you what's going, but obviously then routing those portions of the expense to the appropriate accounts so that we ensure that, yes, the customer gets billed for and ideally pays for this portion, but not for this portion. Same type of thing when we're talking about meals and incidentals, and there are a couple different versions of these types of per diem based wizards. This one, this meal and incidental one, for instance, allows us to make the designations of travel days, any meals that were provided on that particular day, to automatically modify the amount of reimbursement that is, or that either that we can, the amount to be billed to the customer, and if it was employee paid, the amount to be reimbursed to the employee. Okay. Some other nice to haves, obviously, are the ability to attach expense reports, attach receipts to the expense reports. So, if you want to scan a receipt to a PDF, or you want to attach a Word document, or let me see if I have a picture here. Yeah, I want to snap a picture, and upload a JPEG or a GIF file, whatever, no problem. From this, for instance, you could open up the expense report and take the picture and upload right from the receipt right from your phone if you so desire. And then we also have an ability, because so many of our customers actually, they provide their employees with corporate cards to charge their expenses, whether it's for travel or other purposes too. We can also, for those customers that desire, we can structure, depending on your credit card provider. So for instance, American Express has a lovely little feature called the KR 1025 feed, which is totally automated. So literally, as your employees are making charges on their corporate card, those charges can come over here, be brought over to Unanet. Here we see, here's Charlie's card, right? He's got the corporate card with the last 4 digits, 4911. So effectively what he's able to do is start allocating charges from his credit card statement, his darn near real-time credit card statement, to projects in the system. All he has to do is pick one and say, oh, okay, American Airlines, I'm going to import that one to this expense report. It was an airfare that's a little low for a ticket, it seems. So in my internal units, I actually have a charge here for baggage or other travel costs. Since we don't have that here in my demo system, I'm just going to go ahead and we'll use airfare. So when I hit save, basically what's happening, it's pulling that charge. Okay, there's that $90 charge in. It's got any details that were coming over from the credit card company. I enter the details. Now, the real power of this in my last organization was for my accounting department that was having to reconcile all those credit card charges on a monthly basis, right? Because before Unanet, they were printing out all those credit card statements, then cycling through and either importing them to a spreadsheet or just taking paper copies, going through expense reporting, checking off charges on those cards that had been properly allocated, noting which ones hadn't, and then having to, of course, go in hot pursuit of the individual holding that card to find out the proper allocation of the unallocated charges. In this case, my accounting department just ran reports in Unanet, and they could see exactly what was happening, and they could run the report of unallocated charges on Charlie's card and send that over and say, hey, let's go, buddy. We need this taken care of. And then, but again, so easily monitor just by refreshing the report, their reports in Unanet, to see in real time what Charlie had how much he had cleaned up or not. All right, what was still outstanding. Pretty powerful stuff. Again, not just for the end user, but this is the kind of stuff that's contributing to that chart I showed at the very beginning, where with our customers spending far less time on those administrative tasks and getting more to running and analyzing the business. Okay, so from here, the typical time and expense entry side of things. Unanet's also going to help with the administration, the processes to review and approve this data, just as DCAA wants to see. An example would be something like, I'm going to modify this chart really quickly here. Let me go back to the criteria. Let's go back to the previous period, because there I believe I have some time cards in process. There we go. So what this timesheet status chart is doing, and for any individual manager, that manager will probably have this chart reflecting all the folks reporting directly to them. At the division level, you might have one of these for each department, so you can see at the end of the time card cycle, when you're trying to get everyone, all of the time cards reviewed and approved for payroll, for billing, you may have one of these for each of your departments or each work center, so you can see how each one of them is doing. In accounting, maybe you've got one showing the whole company, because the point here is that once you get this timesheet status completely turned green, all timesheets are in the locked and extracted mode. They've been reviewed, they've been approved. You know that, at least in your area, all your personnel are ready. Their time is ready to be billed. It's ready to be paid. Okay, but meanwhile, I can track by clicking on any colored section of any chart, any data point on that chart to be clicked into to get the raw data behind it. So here, for instance, I can see those folks who haven't even started their time card yet. Now, it's the first day of a holiday week, not a problem. Tomorrow, this would be a problem. I can see those that are in use and where they're at in their time tracking. And very helpful in the actual review and approval process is the ability to see, for those of my folks, for those that have submitted their time card, that's all well and good, but who still has to review and approve these particular time cards. So, in fact, I'm logged in right now as Chris, as director, as you see here. So Chris can open this up and you see, well, yeah, I still have to approve Chad's. I still have to approve Clark, David, and Dustin. Oh, by the way, after I approve David, it's going to go to Fran. All right, she's still in the manager workflow on that now. But as it turns out, for some of these folks, I have also got the specific project managers on some of the projects they're working on also in the workflow. In this case, we see George is a project manager that's going to have to review and approve these. We can even give customer seats. Many of our customers do this and have them be part of the approval cycle. Many don't, but just know that the unit has that capability, has specific roles to allocate or assign to customers to limit them to just their data, their projects, if you want them to be part of the process. But then, as I mentioned, you're working through the process at the end of the payroll, at the end of the time card cycle. You're trying to push everything into the green here, and then basically as a manager, you know you're done, you're ready to go. And now, the other way that Chris here could, easily see who he still needs to review and approve is right here on his dashboard. He's also got his approval queue sitting right here. If he clicks into his primary approvals, he can see the expense reports, leave requests, time cards, all awaiting his attention. If he goes down here, we also have an example of how Unanet allows you to, in many areas of functionality, designate alternates. That is, individuals to act for others in their stead, perhaps while they're gone, out sick, vacation. In this case, Fran must be gone. So Chris has been designated to review expense reports, time cards, and so on for her while she is absent. But for his own personnel, Chris can just come in here to any one of these time cards. He can review it. Now, if he was that project manager, George, and Clark's time card, once it gets to George as a project manager, whereas Chris here is able to see everything on this person's time card because he is their direct. Maybe Clark is an engineer and Chris is the engineering manager. But if George is part of the review cycle and he's a project manager and only the project manager for this project and neither of these, when the time card goes to George, he's only going to see the sections of this time card that fall under his purview, under his authority for his projects. All right, you can approve it, you disapprove it, You're going to have to enter a reason, right, for that audit trail, and to let Clark know, because like most of our customers, you will probably have the system notify Clark that his time card was just approved, so he gets that email. He can see the disapproval reason. It'll have a link right back to the disapproved time card, so he can jump in there and take care of things, basically as efficiently as possible. Okay. All right. Let me think. Anything else? Obviously, same thing. Here, if I can go back to the queue, of course, same thing. Whether it be time cards, leave requests, or expense reports. Now, that's, I think, about as far as I'm going to go with time and expense administration. Now let's talk a little bit about the bigger picture, because obviously in looking at projects, looking at entering time and expenses, we've talked about, for instance, direct versus indirect. In fact, let me go ahead and log in as our administrator again, where we have access to all the features and configuration of the platform. And in doing so, what I'm going to do, a couple quick things on the concept of how total cost accounting is accommodated and calculated within Unanet. In the DCAA environment, obviously, we are concerned with being able to manage those direct versus indirect costs. So in Unanet, we have the ability to create cost structures, have the ability, and let me go back here real quickly. You can see we can create multiple cost structures. So some of our customers, depending on their size, their distribution, maybe they've got an East Coast and a West Coast operation, they may have different rates and cost structures set up for those different parts of their operation. Or they may have a cost structure or rates for work being done at the company site versus the client site. Unanet doesn't care. You can create as many different cost structures, i.e. ways to calculate your indirect costs and utilize different sets of rates as you wish. If we go into one of these, you'll see what I'm talking about. I'm able to designate of the types of labor cost that I have created in my Unanet platform, which apply to this particular division and cost structure, which ODC costs will be utilized, but then how I'm going to calculate my indirects. Okay, in this case, this organization has the labor being multiplied by the fringe rate, but in fact they have two. They have a client site fringe rate and a company site fringe rate, just as they do with overhead. So then once they make the fringe calculation, the system is then taking that labor and the fringe cost and adding them together and multiplying them by the overhead rate, right? From there, then taking that cumulative amount and multiplying it by G&A to get the G&A costs. And the key here in Unanet is this is all happening in real time. I'm about to show you, because I'm going to show you some examples of it happening in real time, that literally as someone is entering hours in that timesheet we talked about before, this cost structure and these rates can be applied. All right, we don't have to wait till the books are closed. That the system, project manager can run a report, can live in a real-time world while for instance the accounting department is living in a world that revolves around posted data. The beauty of the Unanet environment is I can do either, and in fact in any user screen or report or chart that I'm looking at, while I may have it default to real-time data or I may have it default to posted data, just by checking a box I can switch back and forth. So again, as a project manager, as people are entering time in my timesheet, their timesheet, I may want to run a project status report and see that the latest hours that have been burdened by the provisional fringe rate that we submitted to DCAA. It's a employee working on the client site. Great, I can load the overhead, load the G&A all up right in real time, literally as my personnel are entering their raw data. The system can load this up for me. Now, of course, it's not going to be loaded up on a permanent basis. It's not going to be burdened on a permanent basis for billing and such until accounting actually posts those time records, posts those items in the expense report to the GL, right? At that point, the calculation and assignment of those these costs will become permanent for billing and payroll purposes. But meanwhile, the system doing this in real time, a project manager in something like, how about something like this? Pretty standard project status report format. Some people call it a job status report, so PSR or JSR, where for an individual project over a certain time frame. All right, here I'm looking at February through December. All right, that's fine. For that period, oh no, sorry, that's the project itself. Right now I'm reporting on the current quarter. We can see that right there, and we can see that right here. But within that, because in the criteria for this report, let's pretend this is a project manager, because they have said, hey, use all line item dates that are within the current quarter. They don't have to be reviewed. They don't have to be approved. All right. This is basically saying use live real-time data. Or I could say, no, use data that has been through the approval process. The managers have reviewed the time cards, reviewed the expense report. They've said okay, but it has not been posted to the GL yet. Or go ahead and run this only on that data that has been posted to the GL. And it's that easy. Now, in this case, we'll pretend we're again a project manager. Excuse me. So we're going to use that real-time data. So what that means is that, for instance, labor. As I run this report, if one of my folks just entered some time, literally 3 seconds ago, those hours are being included in the totals here in the raw labor cost, and that then is being burdened with fringe overhead and G&A, showing me exactly where I am to this moment in time. Another way to look at that is if I go over here to the details, I could go into the labor side, and I could see those hours that have been entered, right to this point in time. And by the way, if I'm sitting here looking at this report, and if Charlie's over there entering some time on this project, and I just hit refresh, again, those hours, boom, or Charlene, I see Charlene's working on this project. Those hours are going to show up here. The burdens are all going to be calculated here in real time, and I will, and the results are going to reflect everything that has occurred on my project as of this very moment. All right, pretty powerful. This is really a sea change for us at my last organization, my last company, because, for instance, that let my project managers say monitor. One of their primary jobs was to ensure people were not charging, say, to overhead projects when they weren't supposed to, because in our old environment, they would only be able to really track that down once the books have been closed for the month. By then, if someone had been misallocating time for the whole month, we had a real problem. We were in the hole on overhead. In the Unanet environment, someone started to put something somewhere it didn't belong. They saw it as it happened and could cut it off before it had a chance to gather steam. All right. But the ways that you can look at your data in real time or on a posted basis or what have you are, again, innumerable in Unanet. One example would be my ability to take that pretty standard, common type of project status report elements in terms of labor, ODCs, and what have you, and kind of flip it 90 degrees. Maybe I would use this type of representation for, the weekly department status meeting, because I can now, for each one of the projects in the department, I have that same data, just laying on its side. So the rows become columns. So I can see the labor, the internal labor, the subcontractor labor, the ODCs, and so on and so forth, all the way over to the bottom line. Okay. Thankfully, all these projects right now are reflecting, there's black numbers on my net margin. That's a good thing. Usually in this demo system, I have at least one or two that are showing some red ink. Those obviously in the status meeting would probably be the ones that we would immediately be drilling into, which Unanet will also give you the ability to do. But this type of cost-based report is very good for looking at some specific time frame, right? We're running this for the current quarter. Unanet can also give you the ability to look at your information, your projects, your activities as they are happening in a periodic type of format too. So instead of just looking at one period, this example here of what we call a cost summary and status report, I'm looking at these projects on a month-over-month basis. In fact, further what I'm doing, if we look at the criteria that I had set for this report back in that point-and-click criteria screen, is I have said, please take my actuals, okay, through today, everything, literally I'm saying to this minute, everything that my folks have entered on this project in their time cards and their expense reports. And then tomorrow, from there, take the plans that I had originally laid out and that we've been working against. So basically, show me where I'm going to end up based on what has actually happened through today. Now that we're sometime in September, you see September is a combination of that asterisk of actuals and the plus of plans, and then using plans going forward. But the other flexibility that Unanet provides you is, this. In fact, if I roll over to this side, you can see I've got some unallocated budget here. What that's basically telling me is, against the funded value of this contract, this 4.4 million, having been working on this project, I mean, I would imagine that at the start of this project, the manager had that funded value all planned out. But given what has actually happened so far, we've got $50,000 of that budget that at this point, it's not being accounted for in either the actuals that have occurred or the plans going forward. All right, so this is money that could fall off the table if we do not use it by contract's end, right? Unanet allows me to very easily figure out what, why, where, and when. If I go to my criteria screen, instead of combining those actuals and plans on a single line, I could say, well, instead, go ahead and show me the plan on one line and show me the actuals. Actually, let's let's create a variance too between the plan and the actuals. Let's do that. And notice everything is point and click, even to select the projects that I wanted reflected in this report, or maybe by project stage and so on and so forth. Now when I run this report, I can quite clearly see what has been happening because, for instance, in the case of labor, I could see what I had originally planned to use in labor, but obviously the actuals have been coming in, not insignificantly below that. And this has obviously been building month over month to the point where, again, I currently have, had that unallocated budget that if I does not get resequenced back into the future plan on this project, we're going to lose it. It's going to drop off the table. Again, everything happening here is right now for this project manager is happening in real time, but it could be not just tabular reporting like this, but graphical versions. And this is one that a lot of our government contractor folks like, because in this graphical version of the cost summary and status reporting mechanism, I have the ability to show funded value lines. Right now we can see up here that our total value and funded value on this particular project happen to coincide. In a lot of cases that total funded value might be somewhere below the total contract value, but I'm also able to have the chart back in here in the criteria. I've said give me funded value, total value, but also give me a percent of funded value line. 75% is a pretty typical mark. A lot of customers like to be notified when you've crossed that. We can actually, but you can set the percent, and you can also set the metrics that you want graphed in this. Again, all in a point and click manner. Right now I'm looking at revenue versus cost versus margin, fine, pretty standard stuff, but I could look at any elements. I could have one that's just looking at the details of the labor side of the equation, the ODC side, what have you. But ultimately, having set that criteria and run this report, again, my cumulative revenue lines here are easily, seeing how they compare to my funded value. Any one of these elements, I can click in here and see, for instance, total revenue. How about total project cost here in July? What was that cost made up of? All right, there's the labor, there's the ODCs, so on and so forth. Another important point to make is that in the unit environment, that 75% funded value line, obviously one way that, and where you are in relation to it is one way that we empower that real-time data for you. Another example is the fact that for any project at the project level or at the task subtask level, we give you the ability to set proactive alerts. So for this particular project, content production project, I can say, hey, let me know when I've used up 23% of the hours I budgeted for this project, or some portion of the labor cost. All right, and then in real time, notify both on the dashboard and email the project manager, the project lead. These are different roles that we provide in the system. Some, if you have any interest in the Unanet platform, we'll give you a direct, a personal dynamic demo and show you what all these roles mean and many others in the system. But when someone is entering their time card or expenses in their expense report, and we hit these parameters, boom, they get notified on their dashboard. They get notified by email. In the email, there's a link right to the project status report. Now, by the way, alerts, proactive alerts like this, real-time proactive alerts can monitor and fire not just at the project level, but at any level of the work breakdown structure, all right? And work breakdown structure here in Unanet can go down to 10 sub-levels, okay? 5.1.1.1, all the way down to 10 levels. So those alerts can be monitoring. You can set the budgets that the system should be monitoring the actuals against at any level of that work breakdown structure, and have those alerts monitor at any level. So let me know when, again, I've burned up 50% of my billable labor on this particular task. Okay. Now, seeing that I am about a minute away from the end of the time I have with you here, I'll wrap up. But like maybe the last thing I'll just point out here, in line with the whole total cost accounting concept required in the DCAA environment, because we showed a little bit about cost structures. We show how it plays out in time cards, showed how it plays out in expense reports, and being able to report costs against any, and hence, ideally billable items against any type of direct or indirect project. You could see that with greater visibility here. The fact that among the projects I've got in Unanet, effectively everything is a project in Unanet, whether it's an opportunity that I'm currently working on in various stages in my capture pipeline, whether it's an open project, or as we see down here, indirect types. Might be overhead, might be G&A, PTO projects and such. Again, the fact is everything that everyone does on the time, on an expense basis, on a purchasing basis is going to be recorded to a project, thereby ensuring a complete total cost tracking in under your government contracts. All right, I hope that's all been very helpful. Again, please, if you haven't already asked any questions to your GoToMeeting session, please feel free to do so. We will absolutely get back to you on them. Likewise, you can also make requests through the question or chat session tools there. If you would like to arrange for a personal demonstration, get on a GoToMeeting session and literally dig into the specific parts of the Unanet platform you would like to see. With that, I will say thank you very much for your time. And please enjoy the rest of your week.